What would
David,
you do if you
what are you
discovered your
doing
best
here?
friend of 15 years
Rachel,
had been
please.
secretly working to
You have to
destroy
let
your
me in.
life? I'm about to tell you a story that will
Look
make
at
you
this,
question
Rachel.
everyone you trust.
I told you so.
A story about a pregnant woman abandoned by her billionaire husband on
God,
Christmas
what
Eve.
is this?
A story about betrayal
It's
so
all right.
deep,
I'm so sorry,
calculated,
sweetie.
that the victim never saw it
Here are the
coming
papers.
until she lost
Everything
everything.
is finalized.
Her baby, her reputation,
The evidence clearly
her will to
demonstrates
fight.
that the defendant
But here is what her
prioritized
enemies did
profit
not
over
expect.
safety,
They
leaving
thought she
this
would
court
break.
with only one
They thought she
conclusion.
would give up. They were dead wrong. This is not just a story about revenge. This is a story about a mother who discovered she had claws when everyone tried to make her a victim. If you have ever trusted the wrong person, if you have ever felt powerless against someone with more money and more connections, if you have ever wondered what you would do when your back is against the wall, then you need to hear what happens next. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from today. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists and satisfying justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Now sit back, relax, and prepare yourself, because what Rachel Mitchell went through will stay with you long after this story ends. Let us begin. They say keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But what happens when you cannot tell the difference? What happens when the person destroying your life is the same person holding your hand through every tragedy? This is the story of how I lost everything. My husband, my money, my reputation, my baby, and how the woman who orchestrated my complete destruction was the one I called my best friend for 15 years. My name is Rachel Mitchell, and if you have ever trusted someone completely, if you have ever believed that loyalty and love would protect you from betrayal, then you need to hear what happened to me. Because the monsters in our lives do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they bring pain and tissues. Sometimes they hold your hair back when you cry. Sometimes they plan your funeral while helping you pick out baby clothes. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Christmas Eve, the night my entire world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of 12 hours. The apartment was small, not the kind of small that feels cozy, but the kind that reminded me every single day of how far I had fallen. 8 months ago, I was living in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with a husband who ran a billion-dollar company. Now I was assembling a second-hand crib in a studio apartment, 9 months pregnant, completely alone, trying to figure out why the instructions were written in Swedish. I held up a wooden slat, squinting at the diagram. This piece was definitely upside down. Or maybe the diagram was upside down. This was exactly why I went to law school. So I would never have to deal with furniture assembly or anything requiring spatial reasoning. The crib had cost $47 at a garage sale. The mattress was another $23 from a discount store that smelled like mothballs and broken dreams. My entire nursery setup was worth less than a single dinner at the restaurants my ex-husband used to take me to. I pressed my hand against my enormous belly and felt my son kick. He had been restless all day, as if he knew something was coming. Or maybe he was just annoyed that his mother could not figure out how to put together a simple piece of furniture. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. It had been silent for 8 months. No calls from David, no explanations, no apologies. Just divorce papers delivered by my best friend Megan, who had held me while I sobbed and signed away my entire life. I still did not understand what had happened. One day I was married to a man who swore he loved me. The next day he was gone, and I was served with papers claiming irreconcilable differences. He did not even have the decency to tell me to my face. His father's lawyers handled everything, and Megan was kind enough to bring the documents to me personally so I would not have to face them alone. Some kindness. The knock on my door made me drop the wooden slat on my foot. I cursed under my breath, then immediately apologized to my unborn son for the language. It was probably Jessica bringing baby supplies. She had been texting about stopping by with diapers and those little onesies she found on sale. Jessica Taylor was the only good thing that came from my new job as a paralegal. She was a single mom of twins who understood exactly how hard it was to start over with nothing. I waddled to the door, one hand on my lower back, already practicing my grateful smile. Jessica did not need to spend her money on me. But she kept doing it anyway, and I loved her for it. I opened the door. It was not Jessica. David Coleman stood in my doorway, soaking wet from the December rain, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. He looked nothing like the polished businessman I had married. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his hands were shaking. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 8 months of silence stretched between us like a canyon. Then I tried to slam the door in his face. He caught it with his hand, wincing, but not letting go. Rachel, please, just listen to me. I do not want to hear anything you have to say. I pushed against the door, but my pregnant body was no match for his strength. You left me. You threw me away like garbage. You do not get to show up now. I know about the baby. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stopped pushing. How? Did Megan tell you? His expression shifted at the mention of her name. Something dark flickered across his features. Megan? No, I hired someone to check on you. I have been checking on you for 8 months. That made no sense. None of this made sense. You have been checking on me, Wishy. You are the one who left. You said I was holding you back. You said our marriage was suffocating you. You said, I never said any of those things, David's voice cracked. I never signed those papers, Rachel. The world tilted beneath my feet. What? He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through images. He turned the screen toward me, showing a photograph of divorce documents. Look at this signature. Look at it closely. I stared at the image. The signature was David's. I had seen him sign 1,000 documents during our marriage. That familiar scrawl was burned into my memory. But as I looked closer, something felt wrong. The D was too perfect. David always rushed through the first letter, making it barely legible, and the final flourish was missing. The little tail that he added unconsciously to every signature. That is not my signature, Rachel. David's voice was raw. Someone forged it. I had a forensic document examiner verify it. That signature is a fake. My legs buckled. David caught me before I hit the ground, guiding me to the couch with the same gentle hands that used to hold me every night. The hands I thought I would never feel again. I do not understand. My voice came out as a whisper. If you did not sign the papers, then who did? Who would do this? David sat beside me, his expression hardening. I have spent 8 months trying to figure that out. 8 months thinking you had moved on. That you did not want me anymore. I called you 47 times after you left. My throat tightened with the memory of those desperate days. I called, and you never answered. I left messages. I sent emails. I even showed up at your office, but security said you had given instructions not to let me in. My phone was lost. His air quotes around the word were bitter. My father's security team handled my communications for my protection. Every call you made, every message you sent, they intercepted it. They told me you were relieved I was gone, that you had already moved on with someone else. Someone else? I have been alone this entire time. I have been completely alone. We stared at each other, the horrible truth settling between us like smoke from a fire neither of us had set. Someone had destroyed our marriage. Someone had forged documents, intercepted communications, and fed us both lies until we believed the worst about each other. And I was beginning to suspect who that someone was. Before I could voice my thoughts, a sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, my hands flying to my belly as my son announced his intention to enter the world at the worst possible moment. David's eyes went wide. Rachel, what is wrong? I think I am having a baby. The pain came again, stronger this time. I think I am having a baby right now. The truck smelled like sawdust and something else. Motor oil, maybe, or honest work. It was so different from the luxury cars David used to drive that I almost laughed despite the contractions tearing through my body. This truck smells like a construction site. I gripped the door handle as another wave of pain hit. David kept his eyes on the road, driving faster than was probably safe on the slick streets. I build houses now. That is what I do. You what? He did not answer. Another contraction stole my attention anyway, and by the time it passed, we were pulling into the hospital emergency entrance. The next hour was a blur of wheelchairs and nurses and forms I could barely focus on long enough to sign. David stayed with me through all of it, holding my hand, answering questions when I could not catch my breath. My mother arrived 20 minutes later, her face a thundercloud of maternal fury. Linda Mitchell was 58 years old, worked 3 jobs, and had raised me alone after my father walked out when I was 6. She had opinions about men who abandoned their families, and she was not shy about sharing them. She stopped in the doorway of the delivery room, her eyes locked on David like a predator sizing up prey. "What is he doing here? Mom, not now, please." Linda Mitchell walked slowly into the room, never breaking eye contact with my ex-husband. "You have about 30 seconds to explain why I should not call security, Mrs. Mitchell." David stood up straight, meeting her glare without flinching. "I know you have every reason to hate me, but I did not leave Rachel. I was manipulated into thinking she wanted me gone. The divorce papers were forged. I have been lied to for 8 months, just like she has." My mother's expression did not soften, but something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. "You expect me to believe that? I expect you to look at your daughter." David gestured toward me, sweating and terrified in the hospital bed. "She needs support right now. If you want to interrogate me, fine, but do it after the baby is born." Another contraction hit, and I screamed loud enough to end the standoff. Both of them rushed to my side, ancient grievances temporarily forgotten. The delivery was brutal. 12 hours of labor that felt like 12 days. David held one hand, my mother held the other, and I cursed at both of them with equal enthusiasm while the doctors did their work. At 7:23 in the morning on Christmas Day, Tyler David Mitchell came into the world screaming. The nurse placed him on my chest and everything else disappeared. The pain, the betrayal, the confusion about forged papers and intercepted calls, all of it vanished in the face of this tiny, perfect human being who had my chin in his father's eyes. "Hello, baby." My voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Tyler." David leaned over us, his face wet with tears. He reached out one finger and Tyler immediately grabbed it, his tiny hand wrapping around with surprising strength. "I am so sorry." David's voice broke. "I am so sorry I was not here. I am so sorry I missed everything." My mother watched from the corner, her expression complicated. She had not forgiven him. I could see that clearly, but she was willing to wait for the full story before passing final judgment. For 36 hours, I believed the nightmare was over. I believed that somehow, against all odds, my family was coming back together, that whatever had torn us apart could be repaired now that we knew the truth. I was wrong. The knock came on the evening of December 26th. 2 people entered my hospital room without waiting for permission. Robert Coleman was 70 years old with silver hair, an impeccable suit, and eyes that had never held warmth for anyone except himself. David's father ran Coleman Industries with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything in his life, including his family. Behind him came Megan Crawford, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of deep concern. She was my best friend, had been since college. She knew all my secrets, all my weaknesses, all my fears. "Oh, honey." Megan rushed toward me, her arms outstretched. "I came as soon as I heard. Let me see that precious baby." I let her look at Tyler because I did not know what else to do. I was still trying to understand why Robert Coleman was in my hospital room, still trying to process the way David had gone completely still beside me. Robert did not bother with pleasantries. He handed me a manila envelope with the casual cruelty of a man delivering a death sentence. "Custody papers, filed this morning. Given your financial situation, your history of mental health treatment, I believe my lawyers can make a compelling case for emergency placement." My blood ran cold. "What mental health treatment?" Robert smiled. "It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The treatment your best friend documented so thoroughly. Megan has been very helpful in establishing your pattern of instability." I looked at Megan, my best friend, the woman who had held me through every crying jag, every sleepless night, every moment of despair after David left. She was watching me with that same concerned expression. But something was wrong with her eyes. They were too steady, too calculating. "I was just worried about you, Rachel." Megan's voice dripped with sweetness. "The depression after David left was so severe. I had to tell someone. I had to make sure you and the baby would be safe." The realization hit me like a truck. Every tear I had cried in front of her, every moment of weakness, Every time I admitted I could not afford my medication or had to skip a prenatal appointment because I did not have enough money. She had been documenting all of it, building a case against me while pretending to be my support system. You have been in my home. My voice shook with rage and horror. You know everything. Megan's mask slipped just for a second. A tiny smile that vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. That is what friends are for. Tyler started crying, and I clutched him tighter against my chest. Robert Coleman checked his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Enjoy these moments. He said it like a promise and a threat combined. They are numbered. They left. The flowers Megan had brought sat on my bedside table, cheerful and bright and poisonous. David was the first to speak. I am going to kill her. No. My mother's voice was steel. No, you are not. You are going to fight smart. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. We all are. Mom, she has everything. Every time I cried, every time I struggled, every moment I was less than perfect. She has been building this case for months. My mother sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. Baby girl, listen to me. You are not a victim. You are a woman who forgot she has claws. She squeezed hard. It is time to remember. I looked down at Tyler, sleeping peacefully in my arms despite the chaos around him. He had no idea that his entire future was being decided by people who viewed him as a prize to be won rather than a child to be loved. Then we fight. I said the words like a vow. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we fight. David nodded. Together. My mother did not say anything, but her expression made it clear that David Coleman had not earned her trust yet. He would need to prove himself through actions, not words. What none of us knew was how quickly that proof would be tested. What none of us knew was how much deeper the betrayal went, or how close we would come to losing everything. The war for my son had just begun. The lawyer's office had a fountain in the reception area, one of those multi-tiered things with water cascading down polished stones into a basin filled with decorative pebbles. It was meant to be soothing. It made me want to scream. That fountain probably cost more than my car. I said it under my breath, but David heard me. He did not laugh, neither did I. The consultation cost $200 an hour, and we were already at the 90-minute mark. Nancy Chen, attorney at law, had spent most of that time reviewing the custody petition Robert Coleman had filed and making notes that she did not share with us. She finally looked up, her expression carefully neutral. I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Mitchell. This is bad. How bad? Robert Coleman has retained Harrison and Associates. They are the most expensive family law firm in the state, and their track record in custody cases is essentially undefeated. Nancy set down her pen. He is claiming you are mentally unstable, financially incapable of providing for the child, and that you deliberately concealed the pregnancy to deprive the father of his parental rights. That is all lies. David leaned forward. My father forged the divorce papers. He intercepted our communications. He has been orchestrating this entire thing. Can you prove that? David hesitated. We have the forensic analysis of the signature, but we do not have evidence linking my father to the actual forgery. Then right now, it is your word against his. Nancy's voice was not unkind, but it was not hopeful either. And his word comes with unlimited financial resources, political connections, and a best friend who has apparently been documenting your client's every weakness for months. I felt sick. What about Megan? Is there anything we can do about her testimony? What is your history with Ms. Crawford? We have been friends since college. 15 years. I trusted her with everything. Nancy made another note. That actually works against you. A jury, or in this case a judge, will wonder why a 15-year friendship would suddenly turn malicious. They will assume Ms. Crawford genuinely believes she is helping you, not that she has been running a long-term conspiracy. She is engaged to David's brother. I said it like the damning evidence it was. Brian Coleman. She has been visiting Robert Coleman weekly for the past 6 months. That got Nancy's attention. Can you document those visits? David pulled out his phone. Building access records. I still have contacts at Coleman Industries who are willing to help quietly. Nancy studied the records for a long moment. This is good. This establishes a connection. But it does not prove intent. She looked at both of us. What you need is someone inside. Someone who has seen how Robert Coleman operates with his own family. Someone willing to testify. David's face went pale. My mother, the ex-wife? He told me she died when I was 12. David's voice was hollow. I found out last year that was a lie. She left him 15 years ago and signed away everything to escape. She lives in Vermont now. Would she help? I do not know. I have not spoken to her since I found out she was alive. Nancy stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Mr. Coleman, Ms. Mitchell, I need to be clear about what you are facing. Robert Coleman has spent decades building a reputation as a powerful, respectable businessman. He has judges who owe him favors, politicians who depend on his donations, and a media apparatus that will paint him as a concerned grandfather trying to save his grandchild from unfit parents. She turned back to face us. Your only chance is to prove that his concern is fake, that his interest in this child is not about love or safety, but about control. And to do that, you need people who have seen behind the curtain. How much is this going to cost? The question felt crass, but I had to ask. My bank account had exactly $892.47, less than a single hour of Nancy's time. My retainer is $15,000. Nancy said it without apology. And that is below my usual rate. I am cutting you a deal because I have seen what Robert Coleman does to families. $15,000 might as well have been $15 million. I did not have it. I was never going to have it. Tyler's future was going to be decided by how much money his mother did not have. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk without a word. Nancy counted the contents. Her eyebrows rose. This is $20,000 in cash. I sold my watch collection. David's voice was flat. The only things I kept from my old life. I do not need watches. I need my son to know his father fought for him. Nancy looked at me, then at David, then at the cash. She picked up her pen. I am going to take this case, but I need you both to understand something. Robert Coleman fights dirty. He will use everything against you. Every mistake you have ever made, every weakness you have ever shown. He will try to break you. I looked at David. He looked at me. Something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Then we learned to fight dirty too. I said it and meant it, whatever it takes. That night, I could not sleep. Tyler was in his second-hand crib, making the soft, snuffling sounds of a newborn, dreaming of milk and warmth. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. I kept thinking about what Nancy had said, about needing people who had seen behind Robert Coleman's curtain, about how the only way to win was to expose who he really was. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Megan's contact. Her smiling face looked back at me from the profile picture. We had taken that photo 2 years ago at a wine-tasting weekend she had organized for my birthday. She looked so happy, so genuine, so much like the friend I thought I knew. How long had she been planning this? Had any of our friendship been real? Or had I been nothing but a target from the beginning? The phone buzzed in my hand, a text from Jessica. You okay? Saw your car in the lot late. Want company? I typed back. Come up. Bring wine. Jessica arrived at 15 minutes later with a bottle of cheap Merlot and a bag of potato chips. She did not ask what was wrong. She just sat down on my thrift store couch and waited for me to talk. I told her everything. The forged divorce papers, Megan's betrayal, the custody petition, Robert Coleman's resources versus my $800. When I finished, Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Girl, that is a red flag wrapped in a red flag dipped in marinara sauce. Despite everything, I laughed. It felt strange in my chest, like a muscle I had forgotten how to use. Jessica poured us both more wine. Okay, so your best friend is a snake, your ex-father-in-law is basically a supervillain, and you are broke. What are you going to do about it? Fight. With what army? I looked at her, at my mother's voice in my head, at David, who had sold everything he owned to pay my legal bills, at my own reflection in the dark window. With whatever I have. I said it like a promise. With whatever I can build. Jessica raised her glass. Then you better start building, babe. Because from what you have told me, the other side has a head start. She was right. The other side had money, power, and months of preparation. They had documentation of my lowest moments and a legal team that had never lost. But they did not know what I was capable of when I stopped being a victim and started being a fighter. They were about to find out. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks after Tyler was born. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, frantic legal preparation, and learning exactly how much damage Megan had done. She had documented everything. Every time I cried on her shoulder, she wrote it down. Every time I admitted I could not afford my prenatal vitamins, she took notes. Every time I talked about feeling overwhelmed or scared or unsure if I could do this alone, she filed it away for future use. The evidence she provided to Robert Coleman painted a picture of a woman spiraling into depression and instability. A woman who could not afford to take care of herself, let alone a baby. A woman who had hidden her pregnancy because she knew she was unfit to be a mother. It was all lies built on fragments of truth, and that made it so much worse. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting. That particular government building, smell of old paper and industrial cleaner. David sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. Nancy was already reviewing her notes. My mother sat in the gallery behind us, radiating protective fury. Robert Coleman sat across the aisle with his team of 6 attorneys. Megan was not there. Nancy said they were saving her testimony for the main hearing, building anticipation like this was some kind of performance. Maybe to them it was. The judge was a woman named Patricia Washington, mid-60s, reading glasses, absolutely no-nonsense expression. Nancy had told me she was fair but impatient with theatrics. I hoped that was true. The hearing itself was a blur of legal language and procedural arguments. Robert's lead attorney, a man named Harrison, who looked like he had been grown in a laboratory specifically to win custody cases, presented their petition with smooth efficiency. He talked about my financial instability, about my documented mental health struggles, about how I had concealed my pregnancy for 9 months, depriving the father of his fundamental right to participate in his child's life. He did not mention that David had not known because his own father had intercepted every communication. He did not mention that my financial struggles were a direct result of being suddenly divorced from a billionaire son. He did not mention that my best friend had been feeding information to the enemy while pretending to be my support system. Context, apparently, was not relevant to the proceedings. Nancy fought back with everything she had. She presented the forensic analysis of David's forged signature. She introduced David's testimony about his father's interference. She painted a picture of a young family deliberately torn apart by a controlling patriarch who could not stand to lose power over his son. Harrison objected constantly. Judge Washington sustained some, overruled others. The legal tennis match went back and forth for hours. Finally, the judge called a recess. When we returned, she looked tired. I have reviewed the evidence presented today. Judge Washington's voice filled the courtroom. The petition for emergency custody is based on serious allegations that deserve full investigation. However, I do not find sufficient evidence at this time to remove the child from his mother's care. I felt David's hand grip mine. Hope flared in my chest like a match struck in darkness. I am granting temporary custody to the mother, Rachel Mitchell. The father, David Coleman, may have supervised visitation. We will reconvene in 60 days for the full hearing. Judge Washington looked at both tables with equal severity. I strongly encourage all parties to pursue a reasonable settlement rather than putting this child through a prolonged custody battle. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. For a moment, I could not move. We had won. It was temporary. It was conditional, but we had won. Nancy was already packing up her files. Do not celebrate too hard. This was just the preliminary round. They will come back stronger. But for tonight, my mother's voice cut through the legal warnings. We celebrate. That evening, the 4 of us crowded into a booth at a Mexican restaurant that had cloth napkins only on the tables closest to the kitchen. Linda, David, Jessica, and me. Tyler slept in his car seat beside us, oblivious to the drama surrounding his existence. I cannot believe we won. I kept saying it like I was trying to convince myself. I cannot believe we actually won. Temporarily. Nancy said temporarily. Jessica raised her margarita. But temporarily is better than nothing. David had not stopped smiling since the verdict. It was strange seeing him like this. The David I had married was always so serious, so focused on business, so wrapped up in proving himself to his father. This David seemed lighter, like losing everything had freed him from a weight he had been carrying his whole life. To temporary victories. He raised his glass. And to the permanent ones coming. We clinked glasses. We laughed. We ate chips and salsa and pretended everything was going to be okay. My mother watched David throughout dinner with the evaluating gaze of a woman who had been burned by men before. She still had not forgiven him. I could see it in the way she tensed whenever he touched me, but she was willing to wait, to watch, to see if his actions matched his words. "What is the plan for the next 60 days?" Jessica asked between bites of enchilada. Documentation. I had been thinking about this constantly. We need to document everything. Every time I feed Tyler, every doctor's appointment, every developmental milestone. We need to build an unassailable record of competent parenting. And on the offensive side, my mother's voice was deceptively casual. David leaned forward. "We need to find dirt on Megan. Something that proves she has been working with my father, not just concerned for Rachel's welfare." "And your mother?" I asked quietly. "Have you contacted Margaret yet?" David's expression flickered. "I left a message. She has not returned my call. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't." Jessica shrugged pragmatically. "But you cannot count on her. You need backup plans." She was right. We could not build our entire strategy on the hope that David's estranged mother would suddenly appear to save us. We needed evidence we could control, witnesses we could rely on. "I have an idea." The words came out before I fully formed the thought. "But it might be crazy. All the best ideas are crazy." Jessica grinned. "Lay it on us. Megan thinks she has won. She thinks I have no idea she betrayed me. What if I use that? What if I keep acting like her friend, like I trust her, and see what information I can get?" "Absolutely not." David's response was immediate. "She is dangerous, Rachel. You have seen what she is capable of." He is right. My mother nodded. Playing games with that woman is too risky, but I could see something in Jessica's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "It might work," Jessica said slowly. "If you could get her to admit something, to brag about what she did, or it might backfire completely and give them more ammunition." David was getting agitated. "Rachel, please, let me handle this." "Let you handle this?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "David, I have been handling things alone for 8 months. I am not some damsel who needs rescuing. I am Tyler's mother, and I will fight for him with whatever weapons I have." The table went quiet. Tyler made a soft sound in his sleep, and we all turned to look at him. So small, so perfect, so completely unaware of the battle being waged around him. "I am not trying to rescue you." David's voice was gentler now. "I am trying to help. We are supposed to be in this together. Then let me fight. Let me contribute something more than just being the victim they are trying to destroy." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I need to do this, David. For me, for Tyler, for all of us." He looked at me for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Together, then. Whatever you decide, I am with you." We paid the bill and went our separate ways. David to his studio apartment across town, my mother to her tiny house, Jessica to her twins. I went home to my cramped apartment with my son in a growing plan that might be brilliant or might be suicide. 48 hours later, that plan did not matter anymore, because the knock came, the knock that changed everything. "Police, open up." And just like that, my temporary victory crumbled to dust. The officers did not look comfortable. That was the first thing I noticed. They stood in my doorway with their uniforms and their badges and their carefully neutral expressions. But something in their eyes said they did not want to be there. "Ma'am, we received a report of child endangerment at this address." The words did not make sense. Child endangerment? I have a 3-week-old baby. He is sleeping in his crib. "What are you talking about?" There was an anonymous tip, allegations of neglect, unsafe living conditions. The taller officer held up his phone. We were also provided with photographic evidence. He turned the screen toward me, and my blood froze. The photo showed my apartment in complete disarray. Trash everywhere. Empty wine bottles scattered across the counter. Dirty diapers piled in corners. A kitchen that looked like it had not been cleaned in weeks. "That is not my apartment." My voice came out strangled. "I mean, it is my apartment, but I did not do this. Those bottles are not mine. I have not had wine since I got pregnant. Ma'am, we need to conduct a welfare check. The shorter officer stepped past me without waiting for permission. I followed them helplessly as they moved through my tiny home. Everything was clean. Everything was exactly as I had left it before the hearing. But they had the photos. They had the anonymous tip. They had all the ammunition they needed. The crib where Tyler slept was the only thing they could not question. Clean sheets, proper bedding, a healthy baby breathing peacefully in the soft light of his night lamp. He looks well cared for, the taller officer admitted. But ma'am, these photos raise serious concerns. We are obligated to contact Child Protective Services. The next hours were a nightmare. CPS arrived at 3 in the morning with clipboards and questions and the authority to destroy my entire life. A woman named Carol with kind eyes and a ruthless job sat at my kitchen table taking notes while her colleague documented every inch of my apartment. The photos were fabricated. I said it over and over. Someone broke in and staged those scenes. Someone is trying to take my son away from me. Do you have any proof of a break-in? Carol's voice was carefully neutral. I looked around. No broken windows, no damaged locks, nothing out of place. Whoever had done this was professional. They had gotten in, taken photos, and left without leaving a trace. No, the word felt like a death sentence. But I know who did this. My ex-husband's family is trying to gain custody. They have unlimited resources. They could easily hire someone to stage these photos. Carol made a note. Miss Mitchell, I understand you are upset, but I have to follow protocol. Given the severity of the allegations and the photographic evidence, I need to place your son in temporary protective custody pending investigation. No, I was on my feet before I knew I was moving. No, you cannot take him. Those photos are fake. Someone set me up. The next few minutes were the worst of my life. Worse than David leaving. Worse than finding out about Megan's betrayal. Worse than anything I had ever experienced. They took Tyler from his crib while he was still sleeping. He woke up crying as they bundled him into an unfamiliar car seat. I screamed. I begged. I threatened legal action that I could not afford. None of it mattered. Carol handed me a card with information about how to contest the placement. She told me I could visit Tyler during supervised hours. She said it like it was supposed to be comforting. I stood in my doorway and watched them drive away with my son. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and I collapsed to my knees in the hallway. My mother found me there an hour later. She had got my frantic voicemail and broken every speed limit in Seattle to reach me. I could not speak. I could not explain. I just pointed at the empty crib and made a sound that was not quite human. Linda Mitchell did not cry. She did not scream. She sat down on the floor beside me and wrapped her arms around my shaking body. We are going to get him back. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I swear to you, Rachel, we are going to get him back. The next morning brought another blow. I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications from the people I had not talked to in years. High school friends, former colleagues, distant relatives. They were all sharing the same news article. Coleman heiress unfit mother. Shocking photo buzz. Inside, Megan had given the staged photos to a tabloid. They had run the story with maximum sensationalism, painting me as a mentally unstable gold digger who had tried to trap a billionaire's son with a pregnancy and was now proving herself incapable of basic childcare. The comments were brutal. People I had never met were calling me names I would not repeat. Armchair experts were diagnosing me with personality disorders based on photographs someone else had staged. Hundreds of strangers were debating whether I deserved to have my son taken away. My phone rang. My boss at the paralegal firm. Rachel, I am so sorry, but with this publicity, the partners feel your continued employment would reflect poorly on the firm. We are going to have to let you go. No job, no baby, no reputation. In less than 24 hours, I had lost everything that mattered. I called David. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called my mother. She was already on her way. I called Jessica. She answered on the first ring. Where is Tyler? I could not form complete sentences. Where did they take him? Hang on, I could hear her typing on a computer. CPS has an online portal. Give me your case number. I fumbled through the papers Carol had left me, finding the number with shaking hands. Jessica typed for what felt like hours. Oh no. Her voice went flat. What? What is it? Emergency placement has been arranged with family members who can provide stability. Rachel, they placed Tyler with Brian and Megan Coleman. The phone slipped from my fingers. Megan, my best friend, the woman who had orchestrated my complete destruction. She was now legally caring for my son. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. I stayed there on the cold tile floor for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the last pieces of myself crack and crumble. When I finally emerged, my mother was waiting. "Get up, baby." Her voice left no room for argument. "Get up." They took him. They took Tyler and gave him to her. I know. She is going to turn him against me. She is going to raise my son to hate me. "Get up, Rachel." Something in her tone cut through the fog of despair. I looked at my mother, at the woman who had raised me alone, working 3 jobs, never complaining, never giving up. "You are not done yet." Linda Mitchell held out her hand. "You are a fighter. You just forgot for a minute. It is time to remember." I took her hand. She pulled me to my feet. Now her eyes were blazing. "How do we burn these people to the ground?" The apartment felt different after Tyler was gone, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. His crib sat in the corner like an accusation, a reminder of everything I had failed to protect. I wanted to fall apart. Every cell in my body wanted to curl up in bed and disappear. But my son was out there in the arms of my enemy, and falling apart was not an option. My mother set up Command Central at my kitchen table. She arrived that first morning with the notebook, a laptop she had borrowed from someone at work, and a look in her eyes that I recognized from my childhood. The look that said she would burn down the world to protect her family. "We need a war room." Linda spread papers across the table. "Everything you know about Megan, everything you know about Robert, every piece of evidence, every suspicion, every memory that might be useful." David arrived an hour later with coffee and guilt. "I should have been there." He kept saying it. "I should have protected you both." You cannot protect someone from an enemy you do not see coming. I took the coffee, but not the apology. We need to focus on getting Tyler back, not on what we should have done. Jessica showed up during her lunch break with a stack of printouts. "I did some research on Megan Crawford." "Girl, you are not going to believe this." She spread the papers on the table like evidence in a criminal case, because that is what it was. 3 years ago, Megan was engaged to a man named Richard Torres, wealthy family, trust fund, the whole package. Jessica pointed to a news clipping. The engagement ended suddenly when she was caught trying to access his financial accounts without authorization. She tried to steal from him. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, but his family hired private investigators. They found evidence that she had been systematically gathering information about their assets from the beginning of the relationship. The same playbook she used on you. I stared at the documents. The woman I thought I knew, the friend who had held my hand through every crisis, was a professional predator. How did I not see this? Because she is good at what she does. David's voice was grim. "Really good. There is more." Jessica pulled out another page. After the Torres engagement fell apart, Megan suddenly started a job at a high-end event planning company. Guess who their biggest client was? Coleman Industries. My mother answered before Jessica could. "Winner, winner." Jessica nodded. "She has been orbiting your family for years, David. The friendship with Rachel, the engagement to Brian, the relationship with Robert. None of it was accidental. The picture was becoming clearer. Megan Crawford had not stumbled into our lives. She had been placed there, cultivated, aimed at us like a weapon. Why? I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why go to all this trouble? What does she get out of it? David ran his hands through his hair. My father never does anything without a transaction. If Megan is working with him, there is something she wants, something he is offering. Money, my mother suggested? Maybe. But Megan does not seem like someone satisfied with just money. David was thinking out loud. She wants status, legitimacy, a place in the family. She is engaged to Brian, Jessica pointed out. That gets her the Coleman name, but not the Coleman fortune. I was following David's logic. Brian is the younger son, the backup heir. If you were out of the picture, David, and if your father controlled your son, then Tyler becomes the primary heir, and whoever raises Tyler controls the future of Coleman Industries. David's face went pale. My father is not just trying to take our son, he is trying to replace me. The room fell silent. We all understood what that meant. Robert Coleman was not fighting for custody out of love for his grandson. He was fighting for control, and he had been planning this for years. How do we prove it? My mother broke the silence. How do we prove this is not about Tyler's welfare, but about power? David pulled out his phone. My mother, she has been inside my father's world. If anyone knows his secrets, she does. You said she never called back. She did not. David's jaw tightened. So I am going to Vermont. Tonight. If she will not talk on the phone, I will make her talk face to face. He left that evening. I watched his truck disappear down the street and wondered if Margaret Coleman would help us or if we were grasping at straws. While David was gone, I focused on what I could control. Nancy had given me a list of things that would strengthen our case. Character witnesses, documentation of my parenting abilities before CPS intervened, evidence of stability and support. I started making calls. Former colleagues who could testify to my work ethic, neighbors who had seen me caring for Tyler, the pediatrician who had noted at every appointment that Tyler was healthy and well cared for. One by one, I built my army. Jessica helped me file FOIA requests for Robert Coleman's business dealings. My mother tracked down former employees of Coleman Industries who might be willing to talk. We were three women with limited resources going up against a billionaire with unlimited power. But we had something he did not have. We had the truth, and we had nothing left to lose. 3 days later, David called from Vermont. She is going to help. His voice was thick with emotion. My mother is going to help. What did she say? She has recordings, Rachel. Recordings of my father discussing the plan with Megan. They recorded themselves celebrating the night you signed the forged divorce papers. David's voice broke. They thought it was a victory. They never imagined someone would hear it. I sat down heavily on my kitchen chair. Recordings. Everything. My father outlining the entire scheme. Megan agreeing to infiltrate your life. Plans to intercept communications. Forge documents. Build a custody case. All of it. Can we use it in court? Margaret is consulting with a lawyer about the legal requirements. But Rachel, there is more. There is something else she told me. Something about Megan that changes everything. What is it? David was quiet for a long moment. I think I need to tell you in person. It is going to be hard to hear. David, just tell me. Another pause, then 3 words that shattered everything I thought I knew. Megan is his daughter. I could not process what he was saying. Whose daughter? My father's. Megan is Robert Coleman's biological daughter, an affair 36 years ago. He has been controlling her entire life, grooming her for this. Rachel, she is not just a hired operative. She is his illegitimate child trying to earn her place in the family. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. Megan Crawford was a Coleman, had always been a Coleman. Every moment of our friendship, every secret I had shared, every vulnerability I had revealed was part of a plan that began before I even knew she existed. I am coming home. David's voice cut through my shock. We have everything we need now. It is time to end this. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my empty apartment. 15 years of friendship, 15 years of lies. And at the center of it all, a woman who had been playing a role so long, she probably forgot where the performance ended and reality began. But she had made one mistake. She had underestimated me. They all had. I was not just a victim anymore. I was a weapon, and I was about to prove it. The CPS hearing to reverse Tyler's placement was supposed to be a formality. We had evidence of Megan's fraud history. We had character witnesses testifying to my fitness as a mother. We had documentation showing that the photos used to justify removing Tyler were staged. Nancy presented our case with precision and passion. She painted a picture of a young mother targeted by powerful forces, stripped of her child through fabricated evidence, fighting to bring her baby home. The caseworker assigned to our case, a woman named Patricia who had been skeptical from the beginning, surprised everyone by testifying in our favor. I have observed Ms. Mitchell during supervised visits with her son. There is no evidence of the neglect alleged in the original report. The child appears bonded with his mother and shows no signs of distress or poor care. The judge was different from the one at our preliminary hearing, younger, less experienced, but seemingly fair. He reviewed the evidence carefully, asked pointed questions about the anonymous tip in the staged photographs. And then he ruled in our favor. The emergency placement is hereby reversed. Tyler Mitchell is to be returned to his mother's custody, effective immediately. The court will schedule a follow-up hearing to address the outstanding custody petition from the paternal grandfather. I cried. I had promised myself I would not cry in court, that I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me weak. But when I heard those words, I completely lost control. David held me while I sobbed. My mother wiped tears from her own eyes. Jessica whispered, "I told you so," like a prayer. We drove to the CPS office to pick up Tyler. The wait felt endless, even though it was probably only 20 minutes. Every second away from my son was torture. And then they brought him out. He had grown in the 2 weeks since I had seen him. His face was a little rounder, his eyes a little more focused. He looked at me and made a sound that might have been recognition. "Hi, baby." I pulled him against my chest and breathed him in. "Hi, Tyler. Mama's here. Mama's never letting you go again." Megan appeared in the doorway behind the caseworker. She was wearing a cream-colored dress and an expression of dignified sadness, playing the role of the concerned family friend who only wanted what was best. "I hope you know this is not over." She said it quietly, so only I could hear. "Robert does not lose, and neither do I." I looked at her, at the woman who had destroyed my marriage, stolen my child, and very nearly broken me completely. "Neither do I." I matched her quiet tone. "And I know what you are. I know everything." Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or respect for an opponent she had underestimated. We went home. Tyler fell asleep in his car seat before we were out of the parking lot. I watched him breathe the entire drive, convinced that if I looked away for even a second, someone would take him again. My mother made dinner. Jessica brought champagne. David stayed close but not too close, still navigating the complicated space between ex-husband and co-parent, and something else we had not defined yet. For one night, we were happy. For one night, I believed the worst was behind us. I should have known better. The text came at 11:30 that night. I was just drifting off to sleep, Tyler in his crib beside my bed. When my phone buzzed, unknown number. "Check your front door." I thought about ignoring it. I thought about calling the police. But something made me get up and walk to the door instead. A manila envelope sat on my welcome mat, no return address. Just my name printed in block letters. Inside was a single document, a paternity test. According to this official-looking paper with hospital letterheads and laboratory signatures, David Coleman was not Tyler's biological father. The father, according to this test, was Brian Coleman, David's brother. I read it 3 times. The words did not change. The implications did not soften. Someone was claiming that I had slept with my husband's brother, that Tyler was not David's son, that everything we were fighting for was built on a lie. My hands started shaking. Then my whole body, I sat down on the floor because my legs would not hold me anymore. It was not true. I had never touched Brian Coleman. I had barely spoken to him more than a handful of times during my entire marriage. The accusation was absurd, impossible, obviously fabricated. But the document looked real. The signatures looked authentic. And if Robert's lawyers presented this in court, they would not need it to be true. They would just need it to create doubt. I called David. It was nearly midnight, but he answered on the first ring. "I found something." I could barely form the words. "On my doorstep. David, they are saying Tyler is not yours. They are saying I slept with Brian." The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long. "Rachel," his voice was careful, controlled. "Is there any chance? Any chance at all?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Are you seriously asking me that? I just need to know. You need to know if I cheated on you with your brother, if I am lying about the father of my child, if everything I have said, everything I have done has been a manipulation. I am not accusing you. You are not accusing me, but you are asking, which means you think it is possible, which means some part of you believes I might be exactly what Megan has been telling everyone I am." David did not respond. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I hung up without saying goodbye. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark. My son was sleeping peacefully 5 feet away. My support system was crumbling. And somewhere out there, Megan Crawford was probably smiling. But as I sat there in the ruins of my second victory, something hardened inside me. Something that had been often vulnerable turned to steel. They wanted me broken. They wanted me doubting myself, doubting David, doubting everything there and everything. They wanted me so focused on defending myself that I forgot to attack. I was done defending. Tomorrow I would get my own paternity test. Tomorrow I would prove beyond any doubt that Tyler was David's son. And then I would take every piece of evidence we had gathered, every recording Margaret had provided, every document we had uncovered, and I would destroy them. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I needed them to suffer, because my son deserved a mother who fought. And Megan Crawford had just made her final mistake. The paternity test results came back 48 hours later. David Coleman was Tyler's biological father with 99.97% on certainty. The document Megan had planted was a complete fabrication. I showed David the results without comment. He looked at them for a long time. I should not have asked. His voice was quiet. I should not have doubted you. No, you should not have. Rachel, I am sorry. I was scared. Everything we have been building, everything we have been fighting for, I was terrified it was all based on. A lie? Like I would be capable of that? The anger in my voice was real, but it was fading. I understood why he had asked. After months of manipulation, of forged documents and staged photographs, implanted evidence, anyone would start questioning reality. The important thing is not what you asked, I said finally. It is what you do now. What do you mean? I mean, we have the truth. We have proof that Megan fabricated the paternity test. We have your mother's recordings. We have documentation of Robert's fraud, Megan's history, Brian's drug charges. I looked at him steadily. The question is whether you are ready to use it all, even if it means destroying your father. David was quiet for a long moment. I could see the conflict on his face. Robert Coleman was still his father. Despite everything, there were decades of complicated history between them. Loyalty that did not disappear just because it was no longer deserved. He is not my father, David said finally. Not really. A father protects his children. He supports them. He does not manipulate them and lie to them and try to steal their sons. He met my eyes. I am ready. We gathered at Nancy's office the next morning. Margaret Coleman had arrived from Vermont with a box of documents and recordings. She looked at David with the complicated expression of a mother who had missed 15 years of her son's life. I am sorry I stayed away so long. She said it simply. Your father convinced me you were better off without me, that my presence would only confuse you. I believed him. We can talk about that later. David's voice was tight with controlled emotion. Right now, I need your help. Margaret nodded. That is why I am here. We spent hours going through everything. The recordings were damning. Robert's voice cold and calculating, discussing how to separate David from Rachel. Megan's voice, eager and hungry, outlining how she would document Rachel's weaknesses. Together they talked about forged documents and intercepted communications like they were discussing a business deal. But the most devastating revelation was Margaret's final piece of evidence. I did some digging after David told me about Megan. Margaret pulled out a folder. I have contacts who help me access sealed records. Megan Crawford is not her birth name. We knew that, David said. She is my father's daughter. There is more. Billionaire. Margaret's face was grave. Robert has been grooming her since she was 21. He paid for her education, her apartment, her lifestyle. He trained her to infiltrate wealthy families and gather information. Trained her? Your father has been running a network for decades. Women who charm their way into powerful families, gather intelligence, create vulnerabilities he can exploit. Margaret's voice was bitter. I was one of them once. Before I met him, before I realized what he really was. The room went silent. I stared at Margaret, trying to process what she was saying. Robert Coleman was not just a controlling businessman. He was running some kind of long-term manipulation operation, using women as weapons against his competitors and his own family. Why? I asked. Why go to all this trouble? Control. Margaret's answer was simple. Robert believes the only way to be safe is to control everything around him. Information is power. Loyalty is weakness. He learned it from his own father, and he will teach it to anyone who gets close to him. She looked at David. He tried to teach it to you. That is why he could not stand your marriage to Rachel. She made you soft, made you think about something other than power. And now he wants Tyler. David's voice was hollow. An heir he can raise from infancy, mold completely, turn into the perfect successor. Margaret nodded. That is why he is willing to destroy everyone in his path to get custody. The full picture was finally clear. Robert Coleman was not just a vindictive grandfather. He was something closer to a cult leader, building his empire on the bones of anyone who got in his way. And we were standing directly in his path. Nancy had been taking notes throughout the conversation. She set down her pen with a decisive click. This changes our strategy, she said. We are not just fighting for custody anymore. We are exposing a criminal enterprise. Can we win, I asked. With what we have? Nancy smiled for the first time since I had met her. We are not just going to win. We are going to destroy him. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Nancy worked with the district attorney's office to investigate Robert's business practices. Margaret provided testimony and documents linking him to decades of fraud. Jessica helped me compile every piece of evidence we had gathered into a comprehensive timeline. And through all of it, Tyler grew and changed and became more himself every day. His first smile came during this period, a gummy grin that made every sleepless night worth it. His eyes focused more sharply, tracking faces, recognizing voices. He was becoming a person, not just a baby, and I was there to witness every milestone. This is what they wanted to take from me, I told David one night. Not just a child, these moments, this connection, the privilege of watching him become who he is going to be. David sat beside me on the couch, watching Tyler discover his own toes. They wanted to turn him into a tool, a weapon, like Megan, and like you were supposed to be. Yes, he did not flinch from the truth, like I was supposed to be, until I met you and discovered there was another way to live. It was the closest we had come to talking about us, about what we were now, that the crisis was redefining everything we thought we knew about our relationship. I am not ready to forgive you completely, I said honestly. I believe you were manipulated. I believe you did not choose to leave, but you still left, and the past 8 months still happened. I know, but I am willing to try, to see if we can build something new. Not what we had before, but something different. Something that survives because we fought for it. David took my hand. The same hand that had held mine through 12 hours of labor. The same hand that trembled when he held Tyler for the first time. That is all I am asking, he said quietly. A chance, what? We sat together in the soft light of the living room, our son between us, preparing for the final battle. The hearing was in 3 days. Everything we had worked for, everything we had sacrificed, would come down to that one moment in that one courtroom. We were ready, or as ready as anyone could be, to face a monster with unlimited resources and no conscience. The war was almost over. One way or another, it would end soon. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread, and reporters filled the gallery alongside curious observers and a handful of people I actually knew. Jessica sat in the front row with my mother, both of them wearing matching expressions of fierce determination. Robert Coleman's legal team had grown. 8 attorneys now, arranged like a military formation behind their client. Robert himself sat at the center of them, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, projecting the image of a concerned grandfather trying to save his grandchild from unstable parents. Megan was there too. She had been called as a witness for Robert's side, and she sat in the gallery wearing a simple blue dress and an expression of worried sympathy. The perfect concerned friend. The judge was Patricia Washington, the same woman who had presided over our preliminary hearing. I took that as a good sign. She had seen through some of Robert's theatrics before. This hearing will determine permanent custody of Tyler David Mitchell. Judge Washington's voice filled the courtroom. I have reviewed the extensive documentation submitted by both parties. We will hear testimony today, and I will render my decision at the conclusion of proceedings. Robert's lead attorney stood first. Harrison was just as polished as he had been at the preliminary hearing, but there was something different in his energy, something slightly defensive. Your Honor, my client seeks custody of his grandson out of genuine concern for the child's welfare. The mother has documented mental health issues, financial instability, and a history of erratic behavior. She concealed her pregnancy for 9 months, depriving the father of his fundamental right to be involved from the beginning. He continued for 20 minutes, painting me as a gold digger who had trapped David Coleman with a pregnancy and was now proving herself incapable of basic parenting. He mentioned the staged photographs as if they were real. He referenced Megan's testimony as if it were gospel truth. Then it was Nancy's turn. Your Honor, opposing counsel has presented a compelling narrative. Unfortunately, it is entirely fictional. Nancy walked toward the witness stand with the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. We will demonstrate today that Mr. Robert Coleman has orchestrated a years-long campaign to destroy his son's marriage, isolate him from his wife, and ultimately steal his grandchild for his own purposes. She called Margaret Coleman as her first witness. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as David's mother took the stand. She looked small but composed, a woman who had spent 15 years gathering the strength to face her former husband. Mrs. Coleman, can you describe your relationship with Robert Coleman? We were married for 22 years. Margaret's voice was steady. During that time, I witnessed countless examples of manipulation, fraud, and psychological abuse. Robert views people as pieces on a chessboard. He moves them into position, uses them, and discards them when they are no longer useful. Objection. Harrison was on his feet. This is character assassination, not testimony. I am establishing context, Your Honor. Nancy did not back down. The witness has direct knowledge of the petitioner's methods. Overruled. Judge Washington's expression was unreadable. Continue, counselor. Nancy led Margaret through a detailed account of Robert's business practices, the fake divorce papers, the intercepted communications, the systematic isolation of David from Rachel. With each revelation, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Then Nancy played the recordings. Robert's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. Once the baby is secured, we move Rachel out of the picture entirely. She has served her purpose. Megan's voice responded. She trusts me completely. She will never see it coming. More recordings followed. Robert discussing how to forge David's signature. Megan reporting on my mental state, my finances, my weaknesses. The two of them celebrating each successful step of their plan like they were discussing quarterly profits. By the time the recordings ended, even Harrison looked shaken. Your Honor, Nancy said, there is one more piece of evidence we wish to present. She turned to face Megan, who had gone very pale in the gallery. We have documentation proving that Megan Crawford is not simply a concerned friend. She is Robert Coleman's biological daughter, the result of an affair 36 years ago. She has been working with her father for 15 years to infiltrate and destroy his legitimate son's family. The courtroom erupted. Reporters started typing furiously. Robert's legal team huddled together in frantic, whispered consultation. Megan looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Washington banged her gavel for order. Ms. Crawford, the judge's voice cut through the chaos. You are compelled to respond to these allegations. Are you Robert Coleman's biological daughter? Megan stood slowly. Her mask of sympathetic concern was completely gone, replaced by something hard and desperate. Yes, the word came out small. And have you been working with him to manipulate Ms. Mitchell and Mr. David Coleman? A long pause, then another small yes. Robert tried to stand, but his attorneys held him back. Whatever he wanted to say was drowned out by the murmur of the crowd. Judge Washington silenced the courtroom with another bang of her gavel. She studied the documents in front of her for what felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. In my 28 years on the bench, I have seen many custody disputes. I have seen parents at their worst, fighting over children like property. But I have never seen anything like this. She fixed her gaze on Robert Coleman. Mr. Coleman, you have used your wealth and influence to perpetrate a systematic fraud upon this court. You have employed your illegitimate daughter as an agent of destruction against your own son's family. You have fabricated evidence, forged documents, and weaponized the legal system to serve your personal agenda. Robert sat frozen, his silver hair suddenly looking less distinguished and more like a crown that was about to be taken away. The petition for custody is denied. Judge Washington's voice was iron. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for investigation of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. She turned to look at me. Ms. Mitchell, full custody of Tyler David Mitchell is granted to you, with liberal visitation rights for the father, David Coleman. I am also issuing a restraining order preventing Robert Coleman and Megan Crawford from having any contact with the child. The gavel came down one final time. This court is adjourned. I did not hear anything after that. The world dissolved into tears and embraces. Jessica was screaming something about karma. My mother was crying openly. David had his arms around me, and for the first time in months, I let myself lean into him completely. We had won, not just a legal victory, not just custody of my son. We had exposed a monster and protected our family from his shadow. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. People shouted questions about how it felt to take down a billionaire. I did not answer any of them. I just held Tyler against my chest and walked toward the car where my mother was waiting. We did it, David said beside me. We actually did it. We did it together, I corrected him. And we are not done yet. What do you mean? I looked back at the courthouse where Robert Coleman was being escorted out by his attorneys, where Megan Crawford was probably already planning her next move. We won this battle, I said. But men like Robert do not stop. They regroup. They find new angles. We need to be ready. David nodded. Together. Yes, I agreed. Together, 2 years later. The house was small by any objective standard. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that could charitably be called cozy. But David had built it with his own hands, beam by beam, nail by nail, and that made it perfect. Tyler ran through the backyard with the boundless energy of a 2-year-old who had just discovered the joy of making his parents chase him. His dark hair caught the summer sunlight, and his laugh echoed off the fence we had painted together last weekend. Mama, look. He pointed at something in the grass. Bug. That is a caterpillar, baby. I crouched down beside him, studying the fuzzy creature with appropriate 2-year-old seriousness. Can you count its legs? 1, 2, free. Tyler's counting was enthusiastic, if not entirely accurate. 1,000,000. Close enough. From the back porch, David watched us with a smile that transformed his entire face. The stress lines that had marked his features during the custody battle were mostly gone now. He looked younger, happier, like a man who had finally figured out what mattered. His construction company employed 12 people now. Small projects mostly. Houses for first-time buyers who could not afford the flashy developments that had made his father rich. David said he would rather build homes than empires. I believed him. I had gone back to law school the year after the trial, part-time because Tyler still needed me, but enough to eventually get my degree. Family law, specifically. I wanted to help people like me, people facing impossible situations with limited resources, people who deserve someone in their corner who understood what it meant to fight for everything. Jessica stopped by most weekends. Her twins were in elementary school now, and they treated Tyler like a little brother. The 4 of them would run around our backyard while Jessica and I drank wine on the porch, and my mother pretended to disapprove of how much we were drinking. It was a good life, a real life, built on truth instead of lies. The news about Robert Coleman came in waves over those 2 years. His legal troubles multiplied as investigators uncovered decades of fraud and manipulation. The empire he had built began to crumble under the weight of lawsuits and criminal charges. 6 months ago, he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The coverage showed him being led away in handcuffs, silver hair finally looking exactly as distinguished as a common criminal. Megan Crawford received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. I did not watch her sentencing. I did not need to see her face again. I had spent enough of my life looking at someone who never really existed. Margaret Coleman visited every few months. She and David were slowly rebuilding the relationship that Robert had stolen from them. It was complicated and painful and full of conversations that left both of them drained. But it was also real, the first real connection David had ever had with his mother. She brought Tyler presents. Homemade cookies and hand-knit sweaters and stories about David as a little boy. Tyler called her Grandma Margaret and asked why she lived so far away. Because sometimes, Margaret told him once, People have to travel far to find their way home. That evening, after Tyler was in bed and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, David and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" David asked, "if I had not come to your door that Christmas Eve?" I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth of him. "I would have figured it out eventually. I would have fought. I just would not have had you to fight with. And now I have everything I never knew I needed. A partner who shows up, a son who thinks I am a superhero, and a mother-in-law who sends Robert angry letters in prison just because it makes her happy." David laughed. "She has sent 47 so far. I know. I help her write them." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The crickets sang their summer songs. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the soundtrack of a life that had been fought for and won. I learned something during those terrible months, when everything was falling apart and the people I trusted most were trying to destroy me. I learned that strength is not about never falling down. It is about getting back up when everything says, stay down. I learned that the worst moments of your life can become the foundation of the best. But you have to be willing to fight, to keep going when hope seems impossible, to remember that you are more than what happens to you. And most importantly, I learned that you have to know who is really in your corner. Because sometimes the ones who hurt you most are the ones you never suspected. But sometimes the ones who save you are the ones you almost gave up on. Happily ever after is not a destination. It is a choice you make every single day. Some days it is easy. Some days it is the hardest choice there is. But sitting on that porch swing with my son sleeping peacefully upstairs and my husband beside me and the whole messy, beautiful future stretched out ahead of us, I knew one thing for certain. It is always, always worth it.